All right, now that the field of Democratic contenders for the presidency is starting to become a little more solidified, it's time for us to bring in Chief Running Mouth for some abuse. Elizabeth Warren, the $5 wannabe Indian, back in February, the white media was proclaiming that she backs reparations for Black Americans. Now, of course, if she actually backed reparations, she would be talking to the new voices of black media. If she actually backed reparations, she would be talking numbers. This is just white media propaganda. More lies. Because it's not until you actually look at the piece itself, almost immediately what you see is, in one breath, Elizabeth Warren says we must confront the dark history of slavery and government-sanctioned discrimination, blah, 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 undermining the ability of black families to build wealth in America for generations. Well, all in all, a statement of well-chosen words. Okay, so she establishes that this is about black families. Okay, well, let's see if she does the old Democratic bait and switch, where they say black and then immediately switch to minorities, people of color, etc. Wait, what's this? The very next paragraph. She pointed to a bill she has introduced in Congress. Oh, so she's introducing legislation. Well, who's it supposed to help? It would provide help to minorities. Wait a minute. Wasn't she talking about black families? I thought that's what this was about. I thought this was about black families. That's what Elizabeth Warren said. She said we have to help black families, or rather, we must confront the history of slavery and the consequences undermining black families. But the legislation that she herself has introduced to Congress is going to help minorities. And who are minorities? Minorities happen to be Hispanics, Asians, Indians, and white women. It also includes gays, handicapped, hunchbacks, one-eyed, one-horned, blind, purple, people eaters. Everybody except us. That's what minorities are. So, once again, she sits there and does the old Democratic bait and switch. Oh, we're talking about black people, black people. We're so interested in the black vote. And then as soon as they say, well, we're going to talk about getting black people to vote Democratic, well, we're concerned about people of color and there we go, the old bait and switch. Well, what's Elizabeth Warren's minority-centric legislation proposal supposed to do? What's it about? Is it about making sure that we get cut that check? Is it about making sure we get land grants and housing grants? Nah, instead it's about providing a little bit of money so you can put a down payment on a home. That's Elizabeth Warren's proposal. She's proposing legislation that would help minorities make a down payment on a home. That's it. You're not going to be getting a home. You're going to be putting a down payment on one. Now, this is just a sop to the housing industry. This is just a sop to the real estate industry. That's who this is really about. You're not actually putting something in my hand. You're not putting something in the hands of black people. Instead, what you're doing is you're giving them a voucher that will go to put something tangible in the hands of home builders and mortgage companies. That's who this is for. That's what this is about. Elizabeth Warren, practically all the legislation that she proposes seems tailor-made for corporations and the 1%. And there's a good reason for that. There's a very good reason for that. Elizabeth Warren had spent most of her adult life as a Republican. In fact, Elizabeth Warren was a registered Republican up until the mid-1990s. It only seems that when some Democratic lawmakers were reaching out to her to get her to be an advisor for some of their consumer advocate boards, then Elizabeth Warren started to slowly but surely pivot. Reminds me of what Dr. Noam Chomsky was talking about with the God that failed, that political concept, that if you think that power is going to be in the hands of a private corporate elite, then you become a right-wing advocate for free markets. But if you think power is going to be in the hands of left-wing administrators of the state, then you pivot to become part of the commissar class. As you see in the image from the Washington Post in front of you, Elizabeth Warren tries to explain away her being a Republican, saying that, well, those were the people who best supported markets. So that tells you about Elizabeth Warren right there. She does not denounce market-based solutions, which we all, of course, know has nothing to do with black people. Market-based is just another way of saying class-based. Even the right-wingers don't deny class, but they do deny race. So Elizabeth Warren talking about, I was supporting the Republicans because they were the ones who best supported the markets. That lets you know why it is that she ain't saying nothing about black folks. As far as she's concerned, well, these are class issues. And then she goes on to say, it worried me whether or not the government played too activist a role. Well then, what do you think comes to Elizabeth Warren's mind when you start saying black folks have the right to tell the United States government you're going to make good for the greatest crime in human history? That the government is going to start owning up to its responsibilities to make sure that black people are treated no differently than white people. As far as she's concerned, that's the government playing too activist a role. Well, we don't need the government getting too involved. Why should the government be doing housing grants? Well, you did them for white people in the 40s. And you also gave white people tracts of land for free. So is that the government being activist? Well, it's been a long time. Yeah, but you haven't divested yourself of those ill-gotten gains. So what you get to do is you get to throw a rock and hide your hands. You get to commit crimes. You get to bestow all sorts of free wealth on yourself and then turn around and say, well, we're not doing that anymore. And we're not getting rid of the wealth that we benefited from. We're not going to liquidate any of it. Oh, well, black people should get the same treatment. That's the government being activist, you see, being activist. We need to support the markets. We need to support the markets. That's what Elizabeth Warren's about. When she says market, that's just another way of saying class-based when it comes to actual demographic application of policy. How do the policies apply to the people in the society? Well, it needs to be class-based. Which of course means slanted to the 1%, the upper class. Which under white supremacy, they've been able to make it where a huge number, a vast majority of those who identify as white happen to be part of that upper class. And everyone else, especially black people, have been relegated to the lowest class. As black people, we better start learning to understand that when these other groups use certain words, they don't mean it the same way that you and I do. They don't mean it the same way, the kind of trite dictionary definition. You need to start asking, what's the practical definition? When these people actually take these words that they say and put them into practice, how do they actually manifest? Because that's what lets you know what they really mean. When a Republican says law and order, he's not talking about for white offenders. When they talk about welfare queens, they're not talking about white people in Appalachia. They're not talking about Mormons and sometimes Jews who game the system in order to get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for their little sex or what have you, that they rip off the system for. See, those people are not welfare queens. They're not welfare cheats. Only black people are that. But that's what Elizabeth Warren did. When she thought that she was going to be some firebrand for the right, she was all about no bankruptcy protections and the corporations rule all. And unless you're a corporation, your debt should be unable to be discharged, etc., etc. Massive transfer of wealth to the 1%. But when she realized that the right was not really trying to pick her to have any spots, that she was going to be a law professor at Harvard for the rest of her life, as soon as the Democrats said, hey, maybe you could be useful to us, maybe we'll call you up to the big leagues, then all of a sudden she starts to pivot to the left. But you take a look at this quote that I got in front of you, this blurb here. Elizabeth Warren talking about black families. And then in another paragraph, black families have had a much steeper hill to climb, and we need systemic structural changes to address that. But her legislation isn't to address black people's needs, it's to address minorities' needs, which she knows is a one-size-fits-all watering down. It does not level the playing field. But then again, Elizabeth Warren never said that she would level the playing field. She just said we need systemic changes. She didn't say, and we need to make sure that black people are on the exact same economic playing field as white people. She didn't say that. You look at what she says. She ain't talking about she is not talking about elevating the position of black people, to correct the position of black people. All she's talking about is, here's a couple of proposals, a couple of empty do-nothing proposals. And what's her idea of reparations? This is what Reuters did. They've straight up lied. Flat out lied. Elizabeth Warren never said, I am going to propose a reparations bill. She's talking about a freaking housing bill that's simply supposed to make it where you can get a down payment on a home. So this is a flat out lie that Reuters was pushing back in February. A bill to help black families put a down payment on a home? Why not a housing grant like the white GIs who came back from World War II got? See, those white guys who came back from World War II, the government gave them housing grants. That's what a whole lot of those enclaves in California were paid for with. They didn't get help with a down payment. They got the whole damn house. But to Warren, to just give black people a little bit of help with the down payment, so that basically means if you're trying to buy a $150,000 home, and a lot of them are a hell of a lot more expensive than that, well, you can get a $15,000 voucher from Chief Running Mouth, Elizabeth Warren, and she'll go ahead and make sure that housing voucher, you can't do anything with it, by the way. It's no good for anything other than you handing it over to a mortgage company or a home builders corporation. That's about all that it's good for. You can hand it over to a bank. So you can give it to some white institution, some white corporation, so the rich get richer. This is not putting power in your hands. This is making you the middleman to put economic empowerment into the hands of people who already have it. The people who have always had it. You see, when it comes to home ownership, the down payment's not the problem. It's the 30 to 40 years of payments that come afterwards. That's the trick. That's what trips people up. The 30 to 40 years of payments that come afterwards. So if all you're doing is helping out on the down payment, you ain't hitting on nothing. This is an insult. And for the white media to claim, hey, Elizabeth Warren's got her reparations out there. This is part of them trying to, they saw what we did to Kamala Harris and they saw the reason why it happened. So now the white media was getting on code. Oh, if these niggers are talking about reparations, then what we're going to do is we're going to claim that everything is reparations. Elizabeth Warren has a bill to help minorities. So Asians, gays, Hispanics, the elderly, the handicapped, white women, all of them can be part of this program. Oh, and a couple of niggers might get in there too. See, this is a reparations bill. This is reparations. No, what it is an insult from the white media, but this is controlled opposition. You have a choice between nothing from the Republicans and next to nothing from the Democrats. Now, some black people, usually paid bootlicks for the white media, they will say that we have to tolerate being insulted because that's all the white paymasters are offering and we should take it. This is normally what you get from Roly-Poly Martin and Joy Reid. We got to choose the lesser of two evils. That's been the retarded political mantra for the last 150 years. Well, as Kwame Ture said, moral people don't choose evil. And people who are looking for justice, they don't choose evil either. It is a false choice to say that you have to choose between what the left hand and right hand of white supremacy are putting in front of you. They're not putting empowerment in front of you. So you make your own choice. It's a lie that you cannot make your own choice. But that's what the white media is telling you. You can only choose from these two. Anything else would be, as Bigot Sanders said, unfeasible. Reuters put this crap out there. One of the main two wire services who most of the white media take their cues from. They figured they passed the coverage of her stance on reparations off to Joy Reid. And they pass it off to a few of the other black bootlicks for the white media, and that they would take this story and run away with it, and they would make sure that we're going to say Elizabeth Warren has she's got some sort of policy to address black people. Reuters said reparations. Ain't a damn thing in here about reparations. Nothing in here. So that tells you how duplicitous, how lying and conniving the white media is. This is not merely putting a slant on the news. This is straight up lies. This is flat out lying. That's why all this broke out after we crushed Kamala in January. The idea was that the white media would have their black sock puppets go at us and define us. This is what they were doing back in February. They were going to define reparations. But they couldn't do it. So when they realized that they couldn't beat us and we would not allow the bastards to join us, they decided to try to shout us down and to use the white media megaphone to drown us out. They would try to bury us in all sorts of lying online articles and online audio video pieces, and also they would manufacture their own reparations so-called discussion, which would be completely separate and completely curated and walled off from us. It was supposed to be them giving themselves permission to say, this is what reparations is, and we're going to say this reparations thing because these new voices of black media, they've been getting too much traction and too much attention. We're going to have to shout these guys down. So what we're going to do is we're going to put on some really high-profile frauds. We're going to bring some of our bootlicks like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Danny Glover. He hasn't worked in a while. We're going to bring these clowns up to Capitol Hill, and we're going to go ahead and have some cameras there, and we're going to put on a show, a real show. You know, these niggers, they've been desperate to be seen as being legitimate. They've been desperate to be seen as someone taking their concerns seriously. That's what we're going to do. We're going to put on a show. We're going to pretend to take it seriously. But all the while, we will be saying that black people don't really need a check. That's what it's going to be. Reparations can be anything. So when you saw Ta-Nehisi Coates and Julianne Malveaux and those other clowns who were up there, all of them are in agreement about one thing. Reparations doesn't need to be a check. In fact, reparations shouldn't be a check. There's many things that could be reparations, as long as it's not a check. You see how it dovetails perfectly with what Elizabeth Warren has said and what the white media is putting out there? See, these guys are all working together. They're all on code against us. But the white media has begun this new damned to fail media offensive, putting on high-profile media circuses where they bring their pet Negroes to, like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Puff Daddy, and have them get in front of the cameras and pretend to be talking like us and pretend to be saying what we say. And when it's just the same old babbling and talking about nothing, they get so surprised. How come you niggers aren't falling for it? Because they figure to themselves, if we just make enough noise, and if we just get enough of these niggers looking in our direction, why, they'll fall for the okie doke. We just got to make enough noise and get enough attention, because that's been the tried and true formula. Make sure that you have the entire white media at once publicize, hey, here's this new revolting summit. We're going to have some rappers and actors and some Z-list black celebs and some burned out wannabe model actress whatevers. We're going to have them on stage, and they're going to be saying, we're talking about a black agenda, hardy har har. And the niggers, you guys are going to be looking, because, hey, you guys never can resist these entertainers. Black people are oversampled when it comes to entertainment. So it just seems, hey, that's not even a question, that if you put some entertainers and actors out there, black people, like so many Pavlovian dogs, will start drooling at the mouth and running in their direction, except it didn't happen. They're being neutralized. This would-be distraction campaign has failed. They won't stop doing it, though, because this is all they got. But that's the idea at work here. The white media would make the clearly phony claim that Elizabeth Warren favored reparations. They would do that for the headline. And most folks never read past the headlines. So they say, oh, Elizabeth Warren favors reparations. Okay, well, now we know her stance on reparations. And what happens is they make it where they bury the actual news in the article. She never said she was in favor of reparations. She only gave a blink and you'll miss it mention of slavery and the consequences that it's had for black folks. And after that, she says, so since slavery has had such a horrifying effect on black families, we need a bill for minorities, because we need to make sure that Asians and Hispanics and white women and lesbians and gays and transgenders and everybody except for black people are going to be getting something. Or at the very least, if black people get something, everybody else must get the same. The racial wealth gap, which is actually the black vis-a-vis everyone else wealth gap, must be maintained at all costs. That's what Elizabeth Warren's all about. That's what she's always been about. Don't let the white media sit here and pull some con on you. Don't let the white media sit here and throw a rock and hide their hands. Don't let them get away with some phony baloney claim that Elizabeth Warren ever favored reparations, and then they have to hide her in white media venues like TV studios or town halls put on by those same TV networks. And they make sure that the audience is carefully vetted and curated and carefully selected. And they make sure that no troublemakers get into the proceedings. And the only people who will be allowed to ask any questions will usually be individuals who are campaign supporters, people who they've already had a chance to look and say, oh, this person's worked on numerous campaigns, so we know that they won't break bad on us with the questions. But the new voices of black media are firmly in control, and we have made this plan irrelevant. We pressed Elizabeth Warren. Jamie and Fowler ran up on her and said, hey, we got to talk about them reparations. You need to cut the check. What about that check? And Elizabeth Warren said, check for what? So much for supporting reparations, huh? Family, we need more street soldiers. We need more of you out there to put the pressure on and keep the pressure on. We can't wait for the white media to report on something. We have to make things happen. That's how you take control and stay in control. We got to be proactive, not waiting to see what the bad guys do next. We got to get them on the defensive. And that means forcing them to react to what we do, as opposed to us trying to put out the 100 little fires that they keep setting. Like that brother who called out Gina Yashir. He knew where she would be at, and he made sure to speak up. That's part of keeping the pressure on. There are too many black folks who want to make excuses for the fact that they don't actually want to do anything because they're looking for a leader. Leader is just a code for, I want somebody else to do it, not me. And that's how movements die. Movements die when you sit around waiting to be led. You get proactive, and what happens is the movement cannot be stopped. The bad guys get put on the defensive, and they stay on the defensive because all of us are keeping them there. None of the new voices of black media can be in all places at once, but those of you who hear this, you guys can be in all places. We work together. We put the arm on these bastards, and they will fall over. For so long, they've had it all their own way. They controlled the agenda-setting media, and they had indoctrinated us with the idea that we should be following leaders. And white power was fine with that because ever since Reconstruction, they've been the one choosing who was a black leader. They planted stooges among us, and eventually they had entire organizations of black flunkies who would pretend to be our advocates. As Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in controlling both sides of an argument. And as I've always told you, controlled opposition is how you enslave a group of people for the long term. At some point, you got to make them into collaborators in their own oppression. And the foundation of all induced collaboration is to present somebody with a false choice and to get them to narrow their behavior to those false choices. Now, normally, this kind of remote control of an oppressed group can go on for hundreds of years. The Romans did it for over 1,000 years. We, on the other hand, looks like we caught onto the scam and we have made some moves a hell of a lot sooner, but we're not making them aggressively enough. That's where you come in. We're not going to be waiting to see if the white media confronts any of these tools of white supremacy on the campaign trail, because the job of the white media is to validate and reinforce what these tools say. Their job is to support the administrative arm of white supremacy. Our job is to break it. And this piece by Reuters, the typical white media template, their narrative that they always use, their standard format for addressing issues of black people, they said that 68% of Americans oppose reparations. Well, as I told you in my video takedown of Jonathan putting on his cape heart, that figure of 68% is the same for all issues when it comes to black people. That has always been the case, going back over 60 years. I told you about how you can go back to the polls about Freedom Riders in the 1950s. The percentage of people who opposed the Freedom Riders was about 68%. Dr. King's March on Washington, 68% of people polled about it said that they opposed it. So the white media's position is that if a majority of people polled oppose something, then that means it shouldn't happen. Or at least that's strongly implied. They always make sure to put that in there. By the way, just so you know, so percentage of Americans oppose this. Now, see, they never do that when it comes to gays. When it comes to the LGBT community, they never ever do that. It's just a matter of the gays want something. Here's some mean old homophobes who are opposed to it, and that's that. They don't make it seem as if the homophobes have the majority of the population on their side. They don't frame it that way. They make sure to put a slant on it where, well, when it comes to the LGBT community, we're not going to say that Americans overwhelmingly oppose something. In fact, we're going to try to find a way to find a poll or even make one up that says the majority of Americans are in favor of LGBT fill in the blank. But when it comes to black people, a majority of Americans don't like it. They're opposed to it. Congress never, ever supported this. Congress never approved of reparations. And most Americans are not in favor of it. Now, whenever the white media drags out the old saw about 68% of Americans are opposed to whatever these Negroes are agitating for, my response is the same as Dick Cheney's response when 60 Minutes told him that a majority of Americans opposed his Iraq war. So, that was Dick Cheney's response. Thousands of Americans dying, totally unnecessary, a war of choice and bad choice at that. And what was his response? So? But what the white media never mentions is that more Americans support reparations now than have ever supported it in the country's histories. Notice how that never makes the coverage. Notice how they never bring it into historical review. The white media pretends as if, oh, well, reparations just came up in the last 5 minutes, and this is what Americans have always thought, because they don't ever give you any sort of comparative analysis. They don't say, oh, by the way, let's compare this to what Americans said about reparations 50 years ago, what they said 20 years ago. I was the one who pointed out to you that support for reparations has grown over the last few decades. Support for reparations is higher now than it's ever been in the country's history. The Reuters is not going to tell you that. All these white media organizations, you think to yourself that, oh, I'm getting all the news as fit to print and it's being brought to me by a bunch of experts. No, it's being brought to you by a bunch of mouth-frothing, knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing white supremacist trash. That's who populates Reuters, and that's who populates the AP, or as I like to call them, the Aryan propagandists, and the New York Slime, and the Washington Post, and all the rest of them. You are not hearing from the best and brightest. You're hearing from a bunch of white supremacist ideologues. But what they're doing is they're miseducating you. They're trying to find a way to contain the way that you think about your own power. And what they're doing is they're trying to indoctrinate you that, well, there's a majority that's against you. Hell, the majority's always been against us. That doesn't mean anything. This is meant to discourage you. It's meant to demoralize you. And for a lot of you, it will work because too many black people are always looking for a cop-out. Too many black people are looking for an excuse to quit the field. Too many black people are looking for somebody else to fight for their empowerment. Too many black people don't actually want black empowerment. They just want a comfortable place under white supremacy. White supremacy knows this. Roly-poly and Angela Rye with lettuce and tomatoes on the side. These clowns, these guys are the honest sellouts. At least they'll go ahead and admit that I ain't fighting no white supremacy. I ain't doing that. Because they understand that that's how they get their paycheck. But I'd like to know, what's your excuse? What's your excuse for taking the soft line against white supremacy? When white supremacy's out here telling these lies, what's your excuse for remaining silent and remaining idle and doing nothing? What's your excuse? Who's paying you? No, we're not going to be having the do-nothings taking part in this. Black empowerment is for the doers, not the talkers. The individuals who actually want black empowerment, they're going to have to start thinking for themselves and understanding that white power created the white media, and they didn't do it to inform you. They did it to misinform and disinform you. They did it for the sake of indoctrination. Only the new voices of black media are going to help you to understand how to see things in terms that empower you. Whenever you look at what the white media is presenting, the very first thing you're supposed to be doing is reading between the lines and looking and asking not merely what did the white media say, but also what is it that they're not saying. If there is any one thing that I've spent the over decade that I've been doing this on YouTube trying to teach you, it is to teach you to not merely listen to what your enemy says, but also listen to what your enemy is desperately trying to avoid saying. That way, when the white media presents you with a headline that says Elizabeth Warren has some sort of reparations proposal, that she backs reparations, the first thing that you should be asking is, wait a minute, did she actually say black? Did she actually say reparations? That's the first thing you're supposed to be asking. Did she actually say reparations? First thing you find is she didn't say reparations at all. Didn't even use the word. And when you look at what's supposed to constitute backing reparations, you see that it's nothing more than a two-bit scam to give some money to the banks and the housing and real estate industry. And it's going to be for minorities, which means that black people are only going to get like 1% if they can get that at all, and everybody else gets the lion's share. That's what happens when you listen and you actually listen to what the enemy is saying. You understand that you're supposed, when the white media presents something to you, look at what it is that they're saying, and then look at what it is that they're not saying. They've never mentioned to you that more Americans support reparations now than have ever supported it in the country's history. Why isn't that the way that this is reported? Because that's what's happening here. That's certainly the way that they've tried to do it with LGBT issues. They've always tried to present it as a growing number. If they can't say a majority of Americans are in favor of something for the gays, they'll say, well, but it's a growing number more now than it was 15 years ago. They always present it as that. Either a majority are in favor of it or a growing number are in favor of it. And that is a psychological ploy meant to give you the idea, to instill in your mind that this is inevitable. Oh, this is what the white media wants, so they have to give it an air of inevitability. Oh, a growing number. So they have the momentum is what that's supposed to tell you. A growing number are in favor of XYZ that the white media wants. As a wise man once said, the only time that the media actually cites public opinion on something is when it's something that the media agrees with. They don't cite public opinion if it's something that the media disagrees with. They only cite it if it's something that reinforces what the media's particular view is on the issue. So don't look to your enemy to educate you. Look to your enemy instead to try to lie to you. That's why they're your enemy. The truth is that the white media has seen this, that opposition to reparations has been steadily dropping, not going up. That's something else that they don't point out. They don't point out that reparations support is growing while reparations opposition is falling. This is the white media digging in their heels, their last ditch, and Elizabeth Warren is part of that effort. They're doing everything that they can. They're lying to you. They're trying to shield your eyes from the facts. They're telling just bald-faced lies. Elizabeth Warren's in favor of reparations. What's reparations? Well, it's going to be some housing vouchers for a down payment for minorities in general, not just black families. They're doing everything that they can. This kitchen sink strategy to try to either get us to drop reparations or to deceive us into thinking that their lying non-policies somehow constitute reparations. They're attempts to try to redefine what reparations are, but it's never going to be anything that you say. And since telling the public that support for reparations has grown isn't part of the white media narrative, they're ignoring this fact, and they're hoping that it will fall down the memory hole. But of course, that's not their call to make. The black media is pushing this issue, so it's not going away. And we're not going to let them redefine reparations, and we're not going to let them lie to you and say that support for reparations is low. No, support for reparations is growing. You can prove that. They're terrified of somebody pointing out these facts. They don't want you to know these facts. This is part of war. Part of warfare is you got to demoralize the enemy, and you demoralize the enemy through propaganda. That's what Reuters is pushing. The reality is we're steamrolling the bastards, and they know it. I need my people to understand how the white media puts a slant on things. I need my people to always be framing their arguments in terms of promoting our interests. You don't just take what the white media says at face value and, I guess that's just the way it is. Unless you're intellectually lazy and morally cowardly. If that's how you are, well, I guess that's good enough. But for the rest of us who actually have an IQ higher than our shoe size, we look at what the white media reports, and we've already educated ourselves on the facts. We know that the white media only reports about 1/3, and that's on a good day. They only report about 1/3 of reality, and what they report is so chopped up, fixed up, edited, redacted, and truncated that it bears no resemblance to the reality. We know that they're wrong. We know where they're wrong, and you need to know where they're wrong too. We are not fringe. We never have been. We are being deliberately marginalized, and the white media is helping to take part in that. But they also threw in the allegation that 35% of African Americans oppose reparations. That's not true either. In fact, there are no black people, with the exception of a couple of clowns who think that they're going to get a pat on the head from the white guys over at the country club. There's a few of those morons who are doing it just for attention. I don't like reparations. Those a couple of burned out wannabe celebrities, never going to be. There's a few of those idiots who say that stuff, but they're only saying it because they're trying to get a pat on the head from whoever their country club pals are. But they're such a small number, it's not even worth discussing them. No black people oppose reparations, truth be told. There's only those who think reparations will happen and those who think it won't. When you have black people saying, I oppose reparations, but the truth is no black person actually says, I'm against reparations. What happened to us during slavery, that wasn't wrong, and it hasn't had any ill effects to the present. What you actually have are black people who just simply think that reparations won't happen. And as far as they're concerned, well, why bother fighting for something that's not going to be a possibility anyway? That's the only internal opposition from black folks, just the black people who have bought into the white media propaganda that, oh, reparations will never happen. They spend a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of clowns in front of the cameras and in print saying a lot of black faces that they pay to say reparations won't happen. We just got to get over it. Reparations won't happen. Just give it up. We just got to accept the way things are. It's just a reality that reparations won't happen. They pay a lot of these idiots to say that mess. And a lot of black people will see a black face spouting the white media line and go, well, it's a black person saying it, so it must have some validity, right? When you talk to the black people who are not reparations advocates, none of them says that reparations are not deserved or necessary. Even roly-poly doesn't dare lie about that. They all admit that, yeah, reparations are deserved, and they're certainly necessary, but instead they say it's politically not possible because the beneficiaries of slavery, that is the majority population in this country, they're not about to come up off their ill-gotten gains. So as far as they're concerned, it's going to be white supremacist opposition to reparations. That's the problem that they have. How do we overcome the white supremacist opposition? That's where this alleged 35%, because you can't really take Reuters' word for it. But that's where this alleged 35% of black people who claim to be opposed, they're not opposed to it. They just don't see any way to overcome the white supremacist opposition to it. That's what they're actually saying. What they're saying is there's just too much opposition to it. They're not actually saying we don't want reparations. What they're actually saying, because if you actually had them asked who's in favor of it, who's opposed, and who is in favor but doesn't think that politically we can overcome the opposition to it, you would find that 35% overwhelmingly says, yeah, well, we should have it. I'm in favor of it, but politically, I just don't think it's possible. That's where they would all fall. That's where they would all fall. In fact, you got these Democrats out there. You got these white Democrats saying that. The only clown dumb enough to say that they're not in favor of reparations was Kamala Harris. You think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? No! And we all see how things worked out for her. So yeah, we made an example out of Kamala Harris. And the rest of them, they're looking and going, well, we got to do a little bit of rhetoric. We'll say that we're in favor of reparations, but we'll be damned if reparations is going to be something for black folks. We'll be damned if we actually address the racial wealth gap. We'll be damned if we cut that check. Instead, we're going to sit here and say that we have some same old one-size-fits-all policy that's going to be for everybody. And we'll claim, well, if black people are able to apply for a particular program, well, that means that that's reparations. Sounding no different than the Republicans saying that the NBA is reparations or the NFL is reparations. Let's understand, when you're talking about reparations, you cannot let the white media dictate to you what we think. The white media's job is to control the public mind through crafted lies. So they edit, they distort, they mangle, they misrepresent what we say and what we stand for in order to promote an anti-black narrative. And the most devilish trick of all is to push the idea that black people agree with the white media. That's why they wanted to make sure that they ended their little propaganda piece with, by the way, 35% of black people happen to be opposed to reparations. The last The last sentence said, among African Americans, 58% support paying reparations and 35% oppose them. They want to make sure, well, if you actually read this piece, and people who actually do bother to read white media propaganda, they usually read all of it. We're going to make sure that the last thing you take away from it is why 1/3 of Black Americans do not support reparations. So it's not racist at all. It's just everybody agrees that reparations shouldn't be paid. Why? Oh, even Black people agree. That's how the white media slant works. If it's something the white media wants, if it's something that they're in favor of, then they'll present it as being in the right. And even if it fails, then they will frame it as being inevitable. Meanwhile, they present us in exactly the opposite light. Whatever we need, the only thing the white media says is that the public opposes it. That will be practically the entire piece. Black people want such, and the majority of Americans polled oppose it. They have no problem citing polls whenever it comes to us, as long as it's something opposed to what we want. You talk about how many people in the society want the police to be punished. All of a sudden, the white media is not looking for polls anymore. All of a sudden, well, we're not citing polls, mind you. Oh, we'll say that there's growing public unrest regarding police brutality against Black people, but we're not going to be citing any polls. We don't want people seeing that a majority. We're just going to say that, well, there's a few more people now. They're very careful about that. This endless repetition of these slanted, hand-picked, so-called facts has the effect of conditioning people to be in favor or opposed to whatever the white media tells them to favor or oppose. Well, let me tell you something. My tangibles, my power is not subject to any poll. I'm not asking anyone if they think I should have what is mine. And personally, I love the fact that there's a majority, so many people who hate it. I love that they're gnashing their teeth and they're furious, even the prospect of reparations happening. I love the fact that there's so many of them who hate it. Your pathetic howls and whining is music to my ears. I will collect my check and enjoy the other tangibles that my people have earned, and know all of your childish complaints and worthless protesting will mean nothing to me. Because now they get just the smallest inkling of what it's like to be us. Now they get to see what it's like to be us. This will be an eternal humiliation for them, a slap to the face that they will never get over, and they shouldn't. Justice is not merely balancing the scales. It also requires an element of retribution. The person, or the group, or the entity, and with reparations, we are seeking damages against all three. The person, groups, or entities who have transgressed, they have to know that they're being punished. That's the entire point. Justice requires that. Those who have wronged us, those who have violated the tenets of justice, they're supposed to be made to suffer for it, not just a deterrent for others, but as a righteous and just reward for their crimes. They're getting what they deserve. Something I've been meaning to tackle for a while, and now that she's nearly overtaken Jim Crow Biden as the front runner for the Democratic nomination, I can go ahead and go in on this one. If Elizabeth Warren's stances on the issues, if her intractable antagonism toward Black Americans seems a lot like Barack Obama's, there's a very good reason for that. Both Elizabeth Warren and Barack Obama went to Harvard University, and both of them later went on to become professors of law. Obama went to Columbia to misteach law, and Elizabeth Warren stayed at Harvard. Elizabeth Warren spent most of her life voting for the Republicans. She spent most of her life as a hardcore conservative, not just a Republican, but a conservative. She only became a Democrat. She only decided that she would identify as a Democrat in the mid to late 90s. But you see, this would be one thing if Elizabeth Warren had been a centrist Republican, or a Republican who was right-wing on economics but left-wing on everything else. But Elizabeth Warren has never been that. She wasn't just conservative on economic issues. She wasn't just a fiscal conservative. She was just a plain conservative. She maintained her right-wing, pro-corporate, anti-consumer and anti-black zealotry until it became politically expedient for her to pivot to the left. Well, to pivot rhetorically. That's why I showed you that Politico headline pointing out that Elizabeth Warren was a diehard conservative. Problem is, she's not just was a conservative, she still is. And it's not just Elizabeth Warren. Bigot Sanders claims to be a socialist, but when it comes to black people, he talks and votes in the Senate like every other racist right-winger out there. So it ain't just Elizabeth Warren, and it's not just a question of Democrats being ideologically inconsistent. It's not just a question of one or two bad votes. You see this across the board. The Democrats will be talking that progressive leftist nonsense claptrap full time, but as soon as you mention black people, all of a sudden it becomes, it's not feasible. We need something for minorities. You think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? No. They are all in lockstep about that. Not one of them feels like they're going to break ranks on that one. And they're all in favor of misusing the law to target us and incarcerate us and punish us. And they're all in favor of overlooking white criminality and giving a pass to crimes committed predominantly by white offenders. How many of these presidential candidates have run on a platform of Harvey Weinstein's not in prison and we need laws to make it where guys like him go straight to prison, and you make me president, I'm going to start spearheading those laws? Nobody points out the fact that none of these white offenders in the era of Me Too has had any sort of prison time leveled against them. They go to court where the charges are dismissed. Kevin Spacey, charges dismissed. Harvey Weinstein, the charges are once again, for the second time, being slowly dismissed. Les Moonves has admitted to his sexual predation. No charges. Louis C.K., no charges. And the list goes on and on and on. No, this is not going to be an issue brought by your good white Democrats. Not going to be brought by your good white Republicans either. Because they are the henchmen for white supremacy, as is the white media. So don't let them lie to you about Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is the enemy of reparations. She's spent her entire adult life being the enemy of the black community. Elizabeth Warren has gotten up every day trying to figure out what can she do to undermine and assail the black community today. She has not stopped her anti-black activities. She's only intensified them. And isn't it interesting that this is what typifies the top tier of Democratic so-called candidates for president in the era of Trump? You have Joe Biden, who has spent his entire life fighting a legislative war against black people, from his opposition to school busing to his helping to push the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act. That was the law that put the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine on the books. And his own 94 crime bill, aka Biden's law, as he called it. You got Bernie Sanders, who claims to be a socialist, but when it comes to black people, he talks like Pat Buchanan. And you got Elizabeth Warren, who was a lifelong Republican until it became politically expedient for her career that she should pivot to the left. This is what qualifies as a so-called left wing of politics, the so-called Democrats. These guys are a bunch of former Republicans. And in Joe Biden's case, he's a freaking Northern Dixiecrat. And it tells you everything you need to know about so-called socialism, that Bernie Sanders is against reparations. This is what's supposed to be the difference between Democrats and Republicans. There's supposed to be a difference between the two when you look at them. And you see it's exactly the same freaking thing. So please do not think for one moment that when addressing Elizabeth Warren, you would not bring up the fact that this woman was and still is a Republican in all but name. She needs to be confronted with her anti-black activities. She needs to be confronted with her anti-black Republican record. She needs to be confronted with the fact that she is not for reparations, and we are not fooled, and we're not going to let her get away with claiming to be, and we won't let any of these black bootlicks get away with saying, "Oh, see, she's favors some conservative, she's in favor of some reparations." That's right, some reparations. Well, how do you know that, roly-poly? Reuters said it. See, Reuters said it. Reuters said that Elizabeth Warren backs reparations. Well, I read the piece, dummy. Where does she say that she backs reparations? Where does she even mention the word reparations? She said slavery. She said slavery, and that means reparations. She said we got to do something about slavery, the impact of slavery on black folks, and that means reparations. She said that she would only support a bill to give minorities help making the down payment on a home. Black people are owed a hell of a lot more than just a mere voucher that we can give to some white bank or some white home building company or some white mortgage scam front for a down payment on a home. That is not what white people got. We demand exactly what white people have gotten. They didn't get any help with a down payment. They got the freaking home. So that's what we're going to get. We got to take the hard line, family. We define what our interests are. We define when our interests have been met and when they've been addressed. The white media doesn't get to bestow legitimacy on Elizabeth Warren and say, see, she's addressing this issue. She only addresses it when we say that she's addressed it, and she has not. The rubber doesn't meet the road, though, unless you become involved. Elizabeth Warren, so far as she's concerned, well, there was only one unpleasant incident where this black person came up to her and demanded that she actually take a stand on reparations. See, when Jamie and Fowler came up to her and said, hey, what about that check? In other words, you got a black man standing in front of her saying, reparations, what about that check? We're coming to you, confronting you about reparations. All of a sudden, Elizabeth Warren wasn't saying, well, there are many forms of reparations. She wouldn't even say the word reparations. Instead, it was, check for what? That's what she's about. That's what the white media is about. Well, family, you might want to find out where it is that Elizabeth Warren plans to give her next do-nothing rally or her next pretend faux town hall. Make sure that you got your cell phone camera in tow. Have it turned sideways. We hold our cameras sideways, family, not straight up and down. And make sure to ask the questions that the white media isn't asking. Now is the time to show that we've got the nerve to confront these tools of white supremacy, because when we confront them, when we actually get in their faces, they back down. And when we get the bastards backing down, then what happens is they understand we're in your face. Their opposition starts to become more and more muted, but that only happens when you guys get active. You cannot sit back and think that the new voices of black media alone are going to be doing all the heavy lifting. That's not possible. But what is possible is for us to show that we are united, a united, solid front against white supremacy. And the person who needs to feel the heat next is Chief Running Mouth Warren. And the ones to apply that heat are going to be me and you.